the sound on this? Oh, the stream is live.
We're live.
Okay.
Hi, everybody. You just got a glimpse of the background technical stuff. And on top of everything else, I hope everybody out there is as excited as I am to have Mr. Robert A. Emmons Jr. on, noted documentarian and YouTube channel cool dude with comics, but more importantly, call him Bobby, as he says whenever I see him on a live show. So, Bobby, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Matt. I appreciate being here. I admire your show and your channel. You know, there's, as I was saying before, there's a lot of live shows out there, but you have a really great sincerity and enthusiasm for comics that's just really infectious to watch. So
well, I appreciate
being on the show.
I think that I've watched your stuff, and honestly, your techniques and stuff. I know that you're a documentarian by trade, and you know how to use all that stuff really well. But the fact is that you are able to do that, and your videos just pop, and they're just such a pleasure to watch. It is literally like watching an actual TV show or a movie at the theater, and I really appreciate the efforts you make to do it.
Thank you.
Now, since I've complimented it, let's actually talk about it. Okay. I would like to ask you how it was that A, got you into filmmaking, and B, got you into comic books and comic book documentary making. Okay. It's all under the same umbrella, but I think it's great.
Yeah. Well, I would say I would say I started with comic books first, right? You know, because many of us have started so young with comic books as a way of reading. And I've mentioned this before on a couple other shows, but my first experience with comics was the Archie Digest when I was a kid, and my mom would buy those for me. Particularly whenever I was sick and stay home, I remember she would come with a stack of Archie comics, either that she got at the market or at the drugstore there. And then eventually, you know, I was like, I want more. And then she brought home superhero comics, and that kind of kept me going. So, you know, I've been reading comics since I was a little kid, and I've gone through the, you know, ebbs and flows with comics, periods where I stopped reading. Some people I kind of envy when they say, like, man, they started reading comics when they were 8 and they've never stopped. But there are periods where I stopped, like a lot of people my age now who are half a decade old and went through that early 90s period. For those that were reading comics, you know, new comics, that was kind of a dismal time. I remember stopping reading comics when I was in college for a while, and I just read like indie comics because I really had soured on the superhero comics.
96 was the year for me. It was like, okay, this is just terrible. I can't read this anymore. And I had to walk away for a while.
Yeah, it was interesting. If I can give a shout out to Chonko's latest, maybe not his latest, maybe 2 episodes ago, he was, you know, that his sort of headline was "Why I Stopped Reading Superhero Comics."
Yes, I liked that video very much because
I
liked his honesty in it.
Yeah, I remember your comment first stated like, "I will never stop reading superhero comics" or something, right? And then you kind of broke down what that was, and my stance was, you know, I know like people have said, you know, I'm exhausted by superheroes, and that's a couple of things I'm going to show today. But some people are exhausted by superheroes, particularly superhero movies. But I say the movies, like the superhero movies are just a genre now that exists like any other genre. And there's going to be crappy movies, superhero movies, and there's going to be good ones. So I'm just leaving myself open to good superhero comics and good superhero movies. But getting back to that, you know, I've come in and out of comics a couple of times, but much of my adult life after I returned after the 90s, I'm there. I'm at the comic shop every Wednesday, you know, picking up my new books still, you know, I'll be there tomorrow. So I've been a comics reader since I was a kid. And with filmmaking, I first went to school for journalism, and I thought because I wanted to write about people's stories. I was always interested in people's stories. And awesome. I thought I was going to be a journalist. And then I took a course, and we learned about documentary film. And I was like, oh, that's how I want to tell people's stories. And so I got into, I've always been interested in documentary film. And the first documentary that I made that was really sort of outside the classroom experience, though it was my graduate thesis film. I thought, how can I converge my love of comics and my love of film? And so my very first professional film that played out in theaters and film festivals was a film called Enthusiast. And that came out, I got a lot of press around that because it came out at the same time as Sam Raimi's first Spider-Man. So the local papers, the local papers in Philadelphia, like, saw that I had this movie and were writing about this documentary about comics, because this was also a time when comic books started to be taken a little bit more seriously, not just as like children's fare, but like the collector's market was kind of a big mainstream thing. But comics were being taught in college. We're making big money on the screen and big money for collectors. And that's what Enthusiast was about, was really comics moving into the mainstream. And then I went on to make a few more documentaries about comics, leading me to making this YouTube channel, wherein I thought, how can I share my love and collection of comics, which is not nearly as good as, say, your collection or Alan's collection in different ways.
Alan and Steppo and Man
Yeah,
Cave, if you know,
they have a collection.
They have the big ones
here.
Yeah.
But you have a great collection, looking at, like, the world of DC and all that kind of jazz. I don't have as great a collection. So I thought, how can I share my collection in a new, interesting way? And that was to really talk about comics historically and culturally.
I think that's great. But before we get into more, let's take a moment to say hello to the chat.
Please.
And I want to remind the chat that if you have any questions for Bobby or Robert, whatever you wish to call them, you just put them in there and we'll make sure they get asked. All right, let's begin with our always first K Munin. Good to see you, Andreas. And I answered that question, by the way, in the chat later. We've got Stephanie Madam in the chat. Hi, Madam. Thomas O'Donnell, who gave me that wonderful Legion hat, is here in the chat. Good to see you, Thomas. I've really liked the pickups you've made this week. If you're not watching Thomas O'Donnell's comics, you should. If you like DC comics like I do, he gets a lot of great pickups. Lyle's here. Hi, Lyle. Technically, you were fourth. Lewis is here. Hi, Lewis. I'm glad to see you here. John Harrison's here. John. The awesome Jeff Jack is here. It's good to see you. Appreciate the compliment there. Robbie's here. Robbie. We got Robbie and Bobby. I'm nuts. My mind does these things. Diabetic Superman, good to see you in the chat. And let's see, Nate's here. Hi, Hall, yeah. Good to see you popped in. Comic Collector Coach, good to see you. Apparently, according to Lyle, if it wasn't for me, there wouldn't be a big Lyle. Kind of is true. I kind of had to push him to get on the first time. Comic Mike is here. Hi, Mike. Mike's going to join this Sunday with Stephen and I for the Sunday Superhero Show. And that, you said, Jeff, that seems to be everybody in the chat at the moment. So another thing that I am curious about is how you pick your topics. What is it about a topic that stands out that says, you know what, I want to make a movie about this?
Yeah, that's a good question. And people ask me about this, like, when I come up with my film ideas too. So, I think often I wait for lightning to strike and somehow let the sort of world speak to me in some kind of way. So for instance, so sometimes, I'm just looking at my collection or looking through my comics and I see something and I'm like, I think there's an interesting story in that. I let things in my life inspire me, or things in the world. So for instance, if you saw my last film, which was about Where Monsters Dwell, number 22, it has Electro on the cover. That came to me just like it says in the film. I was watching Garage Geek's channel and he he got an A-OK, and that was one of the comics he got. And when it popped up on screen, I sort of did a double take on it, and I was like, that reminds me of something. And then I looked into it, and that kind of kicked the story off.
Your discovery on that sort of thing, if that had been a DC book, it might have sort of poked my memory, but the fact that you took this Marvel book and then found the Timely book that it came from originally, that was pretty awesome to me.
And that's I brought those with me actually today. Where are they? Just in case.
I'll make you big so you can show the books.
Yeah. So I have both of those here. So so this is what my current video is about. It's about Electro, who I as soon as I saw this version of the cover in gold, I immediately thought of the 1939 World's Fair and the Electro.
Yes.
And then, of course, my strategy with making these comics is, yes, I'm making it for the comics community, but also I try to make them in some way that might appeal to people who are outside the comics community. So how can I connect comics to sort of the larger American story? For the most part, I'm interested, but that's going to be changing as I'm kind of exploring coming up some sort of global comics. So ideas come to me, in a flash. Like my latest one, which I was mentioning before, Matt. I think you'll like it very much because it very much revolves around some DC stuff, particularly Superboy plays a big role in this next video I'm making.
Going back to your last video there, where you're talking about Electro. I was literally in the process of typing a comment about, hey, did you see All-Star Squadron, yada, yada books? And they had Gernback and all that other stuff. And then all of a sudden you started talking about it there. I'm like, I found my people. Yeah. It was just, I erased the message because there was no point in putting it up at that point. But it was like,
where he's sort of the butler of the place.
Yeah.
And, so going into, when I make these films, I would say, I have a decent amount of knowledge, but, that I knew about. But a lot of times with some of these, I'm digging deep. So I'm doing a lot of research and I'm learning some things myself too. That's why I find these really exciting and fun for me, because while I might have the comics and I might know something about them, I try to scratch and dig deeper and sort of discover, ways that I don't know that they kind of connect to the larger comic book story.
Right. As someone who does videos that involve a bunch of research at times, I'm curious, what kind of sources do you use to get your information to make sure that you have the correct information when you're doing these things?
Actually, I meant to say that to you, and I've said it to other people about you. When you do your deep dives, I'm always like, kind of like, I could never sort of be as free form as you. I'm too anxious, you have your notes there, you do your deep dive. Sometimes you refer to your notes and sometimes you just kind of go on. I'm too nervous to have notes on my side that I'll sort of get something wrong. But, I have a lot. So I collected. So, when I was in college getting my master's and doctoral degree, I was doing, I was making films about comic books and doing a lot of research about comics. And I've taught college courses about comic books a couple of times, particularly about the history of the graphic novel and independent comics. But I have a massive collection of comics history books that I use, not just history, but comic critique. And I'm constantly referring to those books. And of course, nowadays, the wealth of knowledge online is extraordinary. And, I'm sure you've used them for DC and Marvel. There's big time collector sites that bring you pretty much through every issue. Like if you don't know,
I know
who the editor was on a book.
There are sites that if they don't say who's the cover artist, for example, they really don't know who the cover artist is.
That's right. Yeah. Because
and that's when I can say, all right, I can stop looking.
Exactly.
We've gotten a question from Robbie Josephs.
Yes.
Robert, if you were going to make a documentary on Golden Age heroes, which 3 would you feature?
Okay. So that's a good question. And as I've mentioned before, I don't really have, my collection is very new. I don't have a lot of these golden age books. And I like to make films about comics I have in my collection. But if I were to have these books in my collection, who would I pick from the golden age? So do I have? I thought I let me see. Well, did it say superheroes in there?
Yeah, it says golden.
Yes.
Well, it says golden age heroes.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So I like a lot. So I like a lot of these superheroes that haven't quite survived in the mainstream. So it would definitely probably be outside of DC, right? If we're going back to companies that have been around that far. So I probably think, like, I've always been fascinated by the Green Llama, the Green Mask.
Biggie Shack is getting into the Green Llama right now. He's picked up 3 of the issues and he kind of wants to get the whole run.
Yeah. So. And I've been very, like, if I could have golden age superhero stuff, I love Captain Marvel Jr.
Yes.
And I wish I could have every Mac Rayboy cover, like, because I just think they're so dynamic and incredible. So I would say Green Llama, Green Mask, and Captain Marvel Jr.
Well, yeah, I would say on similar to you. Like, if people were to ask me, I would say Batman, Captain America, Captain Marvel. Why? Because Captain Marvel was first and was the one that beat Superman. But I love the fact that Captain Marvel Jr. has such a huge influence that most people don't even know, because Elvis based his hair.
I was about to say, there's that great Elvis connection. I used to have a T-shirt that said TCB on it, because I've been to Graceland, and Elvis loved Captain Marvel Jr. That's where he got his sort of hairdo and chops, and the lightning bolt and the Taking Care of Business band. I just love that connection and his love of
I'm a huge Elvis fan. I mean,
Have you ever been to Graceland?
No, but I did go to the International Hotel. What was the International Hotel in Las Vegas when I was there?
Okay.
Got my picture with the big Elvis statue.
Yeah.
Madam has a question. When's the last time you threw away a comic?
When's the last time I threw away a comic? Man, have I ever thrown away a comic? Man, that is a great question, because really it's the story behind it that makes it interesting. Have I ever thrown away a comic? I can't recall ever throwing. Well, here's the thing. Here's what a lot of people say. I can't recall throwing away a comic, but I sure know my mom has thrown away some of my comics that I've left around.
Yeah, my mother's done the same thing.
Yeah. My mentor, who is he was my grad school mentor. He's 76, I think, is what he is. And he has one of those classic stories where, all the comics he had from when he was a kid, his mom threw all those away. And I always think, man, imagine getting that collection. But I don't remember throwing away any myself.
Yeah, no, I mean, my mother had a tendency, if the comic book was in my sister's room and they had ripped it to shreds, she would toss it away. But she knew I was, and that would drive me crazy, because at the very least, if I knew my sisters were done, I tried to bring it to my collection to save it. But if my mom got there first, it would go in the garbage.
Yeah.
And my sisters were into the comics like the Ewoks and the the Heathcliffs and the Richie Riches and
well, I'm trying to get my hands on one of those Heathcliff and the Marvel anniversary. Those are some of the hardest covers.
I saw that, the Heathcliff one.
Yeah.
Sorry, no. We saw the Ewoks one. Sorry, at the Ewoks one.
I'm sorry. Go on.
The Ewoks one was $225 Canadian that Al and I saw this weekend. Yeah. It was like, oh wow.
And the funny thing is I remember. You remember when those were out, and some of them you just weren't really into. You're like, I don't read that. Like, why do I want that? Like, I have like my Thor, my Spider-Man, my Captain America, but like all those other ones I wasn't interested in. And now I wish I had picked them up because.
Well, I always liked Archie. I picked up Archie's too.
Right.
And I liked Charlton to a smaller extent back then, but I mean, it was DC, and then the Marvel characters I liked, like the Fantastic Four.
Yeah.
Or a book like Marvel 2-in-1, because it was still on the shelves then back when I was
Right.
younger. The Thing, and even on occasion, I didn't buy Spider-Man much, but I did like the Marvel team up.
I actually I'm going to share a Spider-Man today at some point, maybe, and talk about it. So.
No. I'm talking to Madam Rhoda put a comment up, and that's called hoarding, my friends.
Oh, yeah.
Don't tell my wife that I have all these. So my next question, of course, is once you get one of these together, not ones that end up on YouTube, but how do you get your movies distributed? Like you said, you got them on the screen at one point, and cinema shows and
yeah. So I've made how many? I've made 4 feature documentary films, like full-length feature documentary films, and I've made many short films. The world of short films really just exists. At one point, people made short films, they played in festivals, and hopefully that short film led them to getting a job to make a bigger film. But now YouTube and the world of online means that short films can have a whole extra life beyond film festivals. So I make lots of short films that play in festivals. Like in the past 3 years, I made 4 short films, and they played in festivals, and I haven't really fully released them online yet, but I will soon, because they're kind of done their festival run. So
have you ever been able to get to Cannes or TIFF, for example?
No, I have not been to Cannes or TIFF. There's 2 of them, but
for those that don't know, TIFF is the Toronto International Film Festival,
and it's one of the best.
Yeah.
So is Hot Docs there, which is happening right now in Canada. But TIFF is great, and Cannes is great. I make very sort of niche documentary films, so Cannes would not be a place, but TIFF could be a place for my films. But I've actually never applied to TIFF.
It almost sounds like the type of film you make would be great at a place like Fan Expo or San Diego.
Yeah, so I played at San Diego. So I've made of those 4 feature-length films. They all deal with very American topics. The first 2 films are historical films. One has to do with actually a Mexican aviator, but who was friends with Charles Lindbergh, and it looks at America in the 1920s. I've made my most popular film by far is I made a film about trains in the 1930s.
Nice.
And man, people love trains, and I still sell that movie to date.
I believe it.
But then after that, I returned to comic books again when I made a movie about Frederick Wertham and seduction of the innocent and comic books in the 40s and 50s. That film's called Diagram for Delinquents. That I played all over the world, at festivals and at New York Comic-Con, at San Diego Comic-Con. And that film's on Amazon, as well as I made a film after that about the history of film censorship in America called Sickies Making Films. And that's
things like the Hays Code, if I'm correct. And
so we touch upon the Hays Code and the MPAA, but it mostly concentrates on, people don't know that, yes, there were those codes. Those were self-governing codes by the industry. But at one point, beginning actually in the silent era all the way into the 80s, there were 7 states in the U.S. that actually practiced censorship in the state itself, state-sponsored censorship, where they would edit films that had to pass an approval board before they could be shown. So that was real state censorship. With the Hays MPAA, that was the industry saying, hey, we're going to step in, just like with the Comics Code, the same exact thing. That's why I was interested in that. It's what happened in comics is what happened in films. The industry stepped in and said, hey, before the government gets involved, let's do this ourselves.
Yeah, you see, you guys are lucky down there, because your governments tend to be hands off on freedom of expression. Up here, owning a comic book was illegal until 2017. Technically, a crime comic was illegal. And before that, anything considered of an adult nature, if a certain thing was shown, it was banned. And it took a Supreme Court decision here in Canada to overturn that we could have open films
Yeah.
Before that, in Canada, there was like the Japanese. Things had to be blurred out.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that yay for porn or whatever, but I'm just using this as an example of censorship.
Yeah, of course.
On a government level. So,
yeah.
And so my next question comes to, when you're doing these documentaries, I really got a kick out of the Frederick Wortham one.
Yeah.
Because I myself have always been a big, proponent of reading about it and seeing that was a big part of comics history. As a comic historian, you cannot, to me, there are three things you can't ignore: the beginning of comic books, Frederick Wortham, and to me, the Captain Marvel Superman copyright fight in terms of that time period.
Oh, that's interesting.
The copyright fight is very interesting if you read the legal documents. It's dry and dull to people who don't like legal documents, but guys like me, I love it. But when you are getting into these topics, do you gain a sense of who the protagonists are? Like, were you able to, for example, realize what Frederick Wortham was thinking? Same with I use this too with your Mexican character you mentioned that knew Charles Lindbergh. Do you find yourself getting into their shoes a bit, knowing them a bit more, and seeing things from their point of view when you're making your film?
Yeah, that's really what excites me about doing these things. So, it's funny. I'm glad you say, like, and I think we've arrived at that, this idea of, Frederick Wortham. Like, you can't think or talk about comics without mentioning him. But I think there was a long period where people wanted to just forget about Frederick Wortham. And in fact, when I first started making that movie, there weren't a whole lot of people who were doing what's a couple of incredible people have done now, and that is get the Two Dirty Dozen, right? There weren't more people who were trying to get the books that were in Seduction of the Innocent. When I was making the film, there was kind of one dude, Stephen O'Day, who was one of the early. You never see him talked about now, but he has the Lost Sodi comic book site. He was one of the first people I know that was really trying to find all of the books that were referenced in there after they, ripped out the page.
Alan needs two. He needs two.
Just two. Yeah. I mean, it's an incredible feat. I think that's remarkable in a number of ways. One, it's just a curiosity to collect, but two, it's really, continuing a history, right? That people who have the collection of these books, which many of them are very hard to get, can now say, like, hey, they really have an archive, a repository, right, of a real piece of history. So with Frederick Wortham, when I was making this film, that film was like in 2014, 2017, around 2017, maybe 2014 it came out. I can't even remember now. There was some chatter, but not as much as there is now. But he always intrigued me as a character in comic book history. And as I looked into him more and more, I always knew as a kid, anytime he was mentioned, it was this villainous figure. But as I researched him, I thought, man, this guy is a lot more complicated than I ever realized, and maybe a lot of people have ever realized.
The one thing I will never begrudge him is you could honestly tell he really had feelings for these children.
Yes,
100%. And that to me excuses a lot of it, because he thought he was doing best for his kids.
Yeah, he was looking out for children. It becomes to be problematic when you see, he sort of distorted the reality of some things.
That's the problem. He went too far.
Yeah, and he seemed to be overcome, or even maybe convinced by his own argument. He became a zealot, right? That nothing else. He didn't really want to see it any other way, until I made a short documentary. This is one of the ones I made about a year ago about his, I thought I brought it up, but I didn't. His letter writing relationship with Al Hewitson, who was the writer and editor for Skywald Comics. It's a horror magazine that competed with the Warren magazine and those horror comics. And they started off as sort of in this antagonist relationship, and then through their letter writing formed a friendship. And in that letter writing, if you read it, between Al Hewitson, this guy who was like Mr. Horror Comics, him and Wortham become friends. He even says, I consider you a friend now, but he says, I still disagree with your stance on comics. And he kind of says, surely you must be able to see that there is artistry, that there is art in comics. And while not completely conceding, Wortham does say, he does have a line, and it's in my little short film, where he says, okay, I do concede, like if someone makes something and they say that it is art and other people say this is art, then what else can it be but art? Before that, he had always said comics can never be art. They're not art. They're actually, they do harm to art. But right at the end of his life, he kind of concedes to this idea that indeed comic books are an artful pursuit.
I also find that in the 60s and 70s, the thoughts about art changed as the Art Nouveau became more of a thing. And some of the things that people would never think would be art, like banana peel skins, suddenly became art.
Yeah, right.
I would say Andy Warhol had a big part of that.
Yeah, and Wortham was a big-time art collector. People don't know that. It was a huge
and maybe that's why he changed his mind.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, we've got a question. Not that. Lau asks, I stalked your IMDb and I see a documentary about Fugazi. Are you a punk fan?
Oh, yes. I'm an old school, like, well, sort of, I came up like, with like kind of a post-punk and early indie stuff. So Fugazi, hold on one second. My cat's going nuts. I don't know if you hear him. Let me let him in.
That's fine. While he's gone, I'll talk about punk that I like. I grew up starting listening to Iggy Pop and David Bowie, who, of course, was the Hello, Mr. Kitty.
It only took a second to let him in, so but keep going.
But and of course, we all know that Iggy Pop is the godfather of punk, and therefore we moved on to the Ramones and the Television. I think was one of the ones I liked. I think they're sort of punk.
Television is great. Yeah, they're kind of
Television, the Sex Pistols,
kind of
Susie and the Banshees, which I have been listening to nonstop since we were on that show a couple weeks ago on Chonko, if anybody saw that, and other ones. And that leads to, and to me, it led to mostly new post-punk new wave. I liked Duran Duran. I liked Adam and the Ants. I liked Transvision Vamp. All these wonderful little bands that a lot of people don't know. And yes, I can listen to Morrissey without wanting to end my life.
I mean, I love the Smiths, and I love people like, I like the Chonko loves this. I love people who kind of come out of this hardcore background or punk rock like Chonko, but still like love the Smiths.
I will admit, I picked up a bass because of Sid Vicious.
Yeah, well, so I come out of like that sort of earlier post-punk. Like I liked Minor Threat, which led me to, Fugazi, who really kind of expanded my mind about like what, sort of continuing that punk sort of political music in a new kind of way that explores not just music that is like sort of pounding, but kind of more sort of diverse in its musical execution.
I remember one time I played the cassette for Richard Hell, like someone had burned, well, I guess it was recorded a cassette for me of Richard Hell and the Voidoids. And my mother heard that and she took the tape and smashed it. She just, I don't know what lyrics set her off, but something about it made her just pissed off. Yeah. And she's like, I don't want to hear, yes, the Misfits, Mike. I agree.
Oh, I'm a huge Misfits fan. Huge Misfits.
I got something to say.
Yeah. I think that song's very popular, but I would say that's on the bottom of my Misfits love.
We actually used to, because Guns N' Roses did it. We ended up back when I was in the band days, we played Attitude a lot because people knew it because of Guns N' Roses.
Oh, I love Attitude.
But the thing is, we did it the Misfits way. We did it, we did it the real.
What's great about the Misfits is that, like, yes, they're like, this punk band who has this like really intense look, but like songs don't get catchier than Misfits songs, right?
Also, the fact that every single member of the Misfits was a comic/horror movie nerd. Right there puts them right into our
like their movie knowledge. Glenn Danzig's knowledge and love of horror film movies is pretty extensive.
It's probably one of the best knowledges I know outside of one of my good friends. So, is there a movie topic you would like to do but haven't had either the resources or the time to get into?
Yeah. So, and you just mean in general, outside of
in general,
comics?
outside of what you, yes, in general or comics, either way.
I keep like a log, because Austin, like the question you asked me earlier about like, where people ask all the time, like, where do you get ideas for films? And sometimes they come to me or sometimes I read something, but so many times I've gotten ideas because people have come to me and said, hey, have you ever thought about this? And I'll be like, wow, that's a great idea. And that will sort of lead me.
That is such a good way to get things. That's why I offer my members the right to tell me. One of their perks is they can tell me if they want a video topic, and I do it if I can.
Yeah, that's why my second. So I consider me being in my second season of this sequential artifacts, and I've made 2 episodes of the second season. And I know my first season, they were every month, and probably some people think that's very infrequent, but they take so long to make. I need a month. This second season, they'll probably take I probably won't even have 12 this year. But what I've opened myself up to with this second season is collaboration with other channels. So I've kind of put out some brief calls to some people that I know saying, hey, what could we make a film about? And I'm working on a couple of things. And after I finish those, I'm going to put out a YouTube video that is a general call to people that says, hey, do you have an idea that you'd love to make about comics in your collection? Let's collaborate. So right now I'm working on a episode with Archivist Adrift, Jason, who I'm a huge fan of him as a person and his channel. And some people might know he's been planting the seeds out there in the public. He's been collecting Fantax, which is this first French superhero. So we're working on a project together with that. And I'm also I'm kind of doing some other. I'm sort of making 3 episodes at a time right now. And as soon as I finish those, I'm going to put out a call to collaborate on more. But as far as outside of comics, I keep a book that says like future documentaries. And they're like ideas I have about films that I either need to, get a bunch of money to make or just get the time to make. And oftentimes they're weird ideas. Like I've always wanted to make a documentary about, and this is going to say, you're going to be like, Matt, you're going to be like, who wants to watch that? But I have an interesting angle on it. But I've always wanted to make a film about silence, where we can find it in the world through
that's actually a really good topic, because in today's overstimulated world, just being able to find 2 minutes of absolute peace where there's nothing going is a luxury. And I think that's a good idea.
And I want to visit, monasteries and some of these chambers that are supposed to be the quietest places on earth, and really make a documentary about silence and what that means in such a noisy world. That's one of my sort of dream docs. I don't know if anyone will want to see it, but and my big idea too is that it will not have a soundtrack, that people will come and watch it in audiences, and they're going to get like a time on the film and they play their own soundtrack that they build for the film. That's kind of like my big sort of idea for it. So it's a bit experimental, but that's kind of a film I'd love to make.
Honestly, that's a film I would watch.
Can you say that loud? I did not hear you.
I know.
Second Floor Comics. Who is Second Floor Comics? Because they're funny.
That's Lewis. Okay.
I've been watching him throughout, and he's got great comments.
Lewis, I'm surprised Jason's not here tonight, because he's one of them. Jason, Thomas, Lewis, and Jeff Jack are all trying to see if they can crack me up in the middle, because they managed to do it a few weeks ago in the middle of an interview with their comments, and they're trying. Jason's not here, but we've got a question here from Jeff Jack. Who are some of the interesting people you've met through your work?
Yeah, so when I met a lot of really great people when I made my Frederick Wortham doc. So I think I did, from what NPR has said, I think I did the last big interview with Al Feldstein before he died. So
that is amazing.
So I went with a very small crew. I kind of sent a message to Al Feldstein's rep, and they hooked me up with him, and he was so gracious. And he said, why don't you come out, stay on my ranch in Montana, and we can hang out for a couple of days and interview. And we just spent a couple of days with him, showing us his artwork, showing us after comics, he sort of went on to a life in nature painting, and they were incredible. And we would hang out in the studio with him. Cool. And so Al Feldstein was.
I did not know that about Feldstein. I just thought he retired in quiet, relative on.
He painted all. I mean, like I said, I saw him not long before he passed, and he was still painting in his studio and really concentrating on painting nature and animals in nature. So I got to meet, he was a very interesting, someone you'll have appreciate, Matt, that I got to meet. And was Paul Levitz.
I am trying to get him to come on the channel.
Yeah, I met him, and he invited me and my crew into his like penthouse. So I got to go to his penthouse in Manhattan.
Wow.
And we go out. We're on the top floor. We enter his apartment, and he has like there's like Jim Lee art like all over the walls, and all these art from like contemporary.
Considering Jim Lee was the one that took his job.
Yeah, right. Interesting, right?
Yeah.
But his apartment was really stark, except for lots of collections of all the DC sort of archive books. And it's not his only residence. That's why he sort of lived somewhere else and had a Manhattan. Right. So that was
must have done well for himself then. A Manhattan penthouse.
I think so, right?
Yeah.
Brian Azzarello was a great man. He was a really super interesting guy. Went to his house, met with him to talk about comics. Matt Fraction was super awesome to talk about. Brian Azzarello, yeah, he was really, really cool guy to talk with about comics. So those were some interesting people on that film that I got to meet and interview.
Now, see, did you look in Levitz's fridge? Now, see,
I didn't, but I'm having a feeling the only thing that he had in his fridge was probably like just water. It seemed like he came and stayed at this sometimes, and he had a house that was more of his home. And whenever he had to come to the city, he stayed in this apartment.
One of the reasons I love Paul Levitz so much is because he seems to write on so many levels. He's got your main story, a small little thing, and then he puts a tidbit that will 6 months later will become a big part of the storyline. He's always got so many levels. Yeah. He did that with the JSA. He did that with the Legion. And I just always thought he was absolutely fantastic doing that. But that was really cool.
And really what was interesting with him too, is I really wanted to talk with him as editor, like, in dealing with, because he was one of the last people at DC, I think, to deal with the comics code. So I wanted to talk about how he dealt with the comics code. And he knew that was what the interview was about, but he was a little aggravated at times in talking about it, and the frustration of dealing with it and what that was like. So
it's interesting you bring up the comics code, and this is why I've been reading Grimjack this week.
Okay,
not this issue, but a couple issues before. You know how everybody writes, like some of the editors write like a meanwhile column or Stan's soapbox or whatever. Well, the first comics guys were explaining to why they don't go to the code, because none of the first comics had the code. Okay, if you can see, it doesn't have the code on anything. And in it, he did an interview with Dick Giordano, who says, this is what I've got to do. This is what I got to do. I've got to do as an editor. I've got to make sure it cannot be this long. The bulges in the pants can't be obvious. All these things, like these are things he's writing in this thing. And he said, the day I don't have to deal with the comics book code authority is the day I go hallelujah. That's what a quote from Dick Giordano.
And I go through all of that in my film, Diagram for Delinquents. And, what was interesting too, is I talk with comic historians in my film too. And of course they were interesting, and they've talked with many people. And, there was a perspective in comics where some people said, well, the comics, some people that you'll have talked to that looks at like, that what the golden age was and then what the silver age was. Some people will say, or what the golden age became, right, from the late 30s and then through the 40s, and when crime and horror were taking over. They said when the comics code came in and we're ushered into the silver age and we get our superheroes back, they kind of said like, man, this was kind of in a way, maybe it was a good thing for comics. While some people were like, no way, how is stifling free speech ever a good thing? So there was that argument that was kind of happening in the background too. That was sort of interesting about some people who thought, well, the comics code did bring back the superhero in some kind of way.
And you know what? I'm grateful for it, because it was those silver age DC superheroes that cut my teeth, that turned me into the love of comics that I have today.
Yeah.
And yes, these guys were a big part of it, but so was Supergirl, Superman, Batman. Part of it was not only did I have the comics there, but I grew up when Super Friends was on first run. Like I was born in 1971. I was a 5-year-old in 76 when they were on all the time.
Well, and go ahead. So that's what I'm saying. Matt, you're going to be very, very pleased once again. And this is a teaser. I don't really like to say what I'm working on in my next videos, but the next one that comes out will be very heavily involving. This is the whole box set. Will very heavily involve the Super Friends. I won't say how, but this will be featured. Many clips from this will be featured in my next video.
All I ask is that
every season, all the different seasons collectively.
Nice. So you're going to have the Wendy and Marvin years and the Jan and Zaina years.
Yeah, that's right. Now, they might not make an appearance in this film, but what's inside this box in some capacity will be heavily featured in my next video.
Very cool. All I ask is that you make it so that Aquaman doesn't suck. See, I've always liked Aquaman. I've hated the fact that the Super Friends people make fun of it. I can see why as an adult, but I couldn't as a kid.
Yeah.
Robert, Bobby, thank you so much for coming tonight. I have absolutely just enjoyed this so thoroughly. It's getting to know a little more behind the stories, the behind the scenes that you're making of the things, of the documentaries and stuff you're making. It's just amazing. I'm that guy. If it's there, I want to know how you did it. Yes, I love the wonder. I love the wonder of Star Wars, but I'm also sitting there going, how did they do that effect? Back at least as a kid. And then I got to see the making of, and I was like, ooh, this is awesome. Back when they used to have those on TV.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for coming tonight. There is no Tuesday night show next week because my wife is making the mistake of completing another year around the sun. So it's her birthday next Tuesday. So we're going out. So we're going to be out. So there won't be a show next week. There will be one the week after. I'm not quite sure I've got my guest locked down for that one, but we're pretty clear on it. If you are watching this on the rerun, check out Robert A. Emmons Jr. at Sequential
Sequential Artifacts.
Sequential Artifacts. Yes, I always just say art. I forget.
Well, that's because that's the pun there, right? That's another name for comics is sequential art.
Sequential art. That's why I think
I'm picking up these artifacts to show.
The link, the link to his channel is in the description of the video below. Check him out. You will be absolutely amazed. He is really, really good. I was blown away the first time that I went to your channel. I think I watched 5 of your videos before I moved on to the next one. Thank you all very much for coming tonight, everybody. If you're not doing anything, go check out Nate Hall Comics at 8 o'clock. Hi, Biggie. Good to see you. Speaking of one of the best guys.
Biggie. I think I've talked Biggie once through a chat and another thing, but Biggie is a wonderful one. Big presence in the community.
He is a huge presence in the community. And when I was when I had less than 40 subs, he had me on his channel. And I always appreciate him for that. Thank you, everybody, for coming tonight. My name's Matt. I like comics, and I hope you do too.
I had to sneak one of my favorite issues in there before we go.
Very, very cool.
All right. Thank you, Matt. I appreciate it.
Take care, guys.